Adab, Namaste to all of you. On behalf of Foundation for Creative Social Research, FCSR, I, Irfan, a PhD student at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, welcome you all to our podcast series titled Vimarsh Cafe. FCSR is a Delhi-based independent and autonomous organization that endeavors to promote interdisciplinary research by engaging with critical themes in social sciences. Our reference point is that liberation for one should be liberation for all. Freedom for one should mean freedom for all. In the past, FCSR has engaged in multiple initiatives and creative theory colloquiums. We conduct annual creative theory colloquium in collaboration generally with India International Center and Raza Foundation, that's usually held in the first week of September every year. In addition to this annual event, we also organize book discussion series, PhD dissertation thesis discussion series, lecture series, amongst others. Today's guest is Varun Wighmal, and Varun Wighmal is a recently submitted his PhD at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Varun's main concern in the thesis, as mentioned in his title, is non-dual conceptions of religion and politics, और इसमें ये डील कर रहा है एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण धर्म के साथ जो सिखिज्म है उनके साथ उसके साथ वरुण का काफ़ी ज़्यादा डिस्कशन, उनका फोकस रहा इस पूरे 4 साल या 5 साल के जर्नी में. तो बिना टाइम वेस्ट किए हुए मैं डायरेक्टली आना चाहूँगा वरुण के पास, और वरुण से मैं पहला पूछना चाहूँगा कि वरुण, thank you so much for agreeing to join me in today's podcast series Vimarsh Cafe. Would you like to briefly introduce your work to your viewers so that they can have a very brief idea of what you have done in your 5 years of precious journey?
Thank you so much, Irfan, and thanks to Foundation for Creative Social Research for providing me this opportunity to present my work in front of vast majority of people who are going to be the viewers of this channel. You've asked this question that, what my work is all about. So I would say that my work is a bit of an interdisciplinary in nature. The exact title is Non-dual Conception of Religion and Politics, a study of Sikhism in Punjab, wherein I have tried arguing that a different lens has to be sort of conceptualized to understand a relationship between religion and politics, specifically when it comes to understanding non-European traditions. And
Right.
the tradition that I have explored is Sikhi or Sikhism.
Absolutely.
Usme basically I'm trying to understand that how this non-duality manifests both philosophically, कैसे वो as darshan, as falsafa, उसके level पर वो कैसे manifest करती है, and how does it manifest ground level पे.
Absolutely.
So I've tried incorporating both the aspects, philosophical as well as quotidian, more everyday political reality. So this has been my work, and wherein mostly it is an interdisciplinary work, as I've said, wherein I have used multiple methods and methodologies, mainly from philosophy, but also a bit of ethnographic detailing is also there.
Exactly.
And mostly the work is takes insights from philosophy of mind, philosophy of religion, and philosophy of science. And methodologically speaking, there are two primary methodologies within
methodologies पे हम अभी आएंगे. Thank you so much for your introduction. मुझे लगता है वरुण ये काफ़ी ज़्यादा महत्वपूर्ण एक काम है, because I think that religion and politics are very important and very critical factors in the 21st century. And it's very important that one talks about how religion plays with politics and vice versa. तो वरुण, पूरा चर्चा करने से पहले it's very important that you introduce your research questions to our viewers, because पूरा जो हमारे रिसर्च रहता है 4 या 5 साल का, इसमें सबसे बड़ा जो चुनौती रहती है वो ये रहती है कि हम अपने जो हमारे रिसर्च क्वेश्चंस हैं, व्हाट इज़ दैट वी आर ट्राइंग टू फाइंड आउट, वो क्या हैं? तो क्या वुड यू लाइक टू इंट्रोड्यूस द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ रिसर्च क्वेश्चन फॉर a student who is interested to go into PhD, and after that would you also consider that you tell your research questions that you have engaged with in your 5 years of journey?
Yes, I think Irfan, I feel that research questions are the fulcrum of the research. They are the central, motive of the research in that sense, because research questions, if you don't have good research questions, it seems to me that your research lacks something substantial.
Absolutely.
Research questions also determines the kind of perceptive, insightful questions that you have. Basically, they are perceptive, insightful questions, and research questions emanate from a thorough literature reading.
Absolutely.
And one needs to look into the gaps that are there in the prevalent research, that are there in the existing literature. So this is what the importance of research question is all about. Now coming to this question of what my research questions were, or what my research questions have been in this research, I would say that my research questions, there were 3 or 4 research questions that I have tried looking at. First was that, what is this non-duality, which is also called as non-oppositionality? What are the philosophical undercurrents or underpinnings of that non-duality? And how does it manifest in both at the social level, political level, as well as how does it manifest at philosophical level? So there are 3 layers to my research. One is definitely philosophical, then there is theoretical, and then there is empirical.
Okay.
And also, generally, like this could be the first research question. The second research question is that how is this non-duality between religion and politics plays itself out in Sikh discourse?
Okay.
And how is it different from secular frame, as well as how is it different from the classical indigenous, or rather I would say not indigenous but Indic philosophies and tradition, or which is generally the Hindu system of thought.
Absolutely.
So, and also the new conceptions, avant-garde conceptions of sovereignties, political sovereignty. How can we conceptualize? Is there a possibility to conceptualize an idea of sovereignty which is embodied, as in it exists in, again, in a non-dual manner, wherein there is no separation between reality and the manifestation of reality, and how this conception of embodied sovereignty is different from the kind of sovereignty that ensues from the logic of nation state.
Absolutely. On the question of sovereignty, I will have to ask 1 or maybe 2 short questions to you, but that will come later on. But I think also the another part जो research में बहुत ज़्यादा महत्वपूर्ण होता है वो होता है methodology. I mean, it's true that research question is at the heart of the research, but then how does a researcher find an answer to this question? I mean, the how part of the research question, that becomes very important. So methodology is very important in a research to find out the answers that one is trying to get from the field. So what was your methodology, since I think it's a work on Sikhism and probably you have focused on Punjab? So would you like to introduce your methodology to your viewers? Did you go to the field, and what kind of the people you met?
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. I second that methodology is, no one can deny the vitality of methodology for research. Coming to the question of what my methodology was, I would say that it was a very mixed kind of methodological and method and methodologies that I have tried incorporating in my research. One was definitely qualitative, and within qualitative I have explored sort of semi-ethnographic detailings and all, wherein I have explored different denominations or sects of Sikhi, and what kind of unique politics plays itself out in these different denominations, and how a certain kind of denomination or a sect which has its roots in a certain logic of modernity now has become the only way to be Sikh, or the only mode of enunciation which is the Sikhism.
Okay.
So there is an ethnographic part to my research, but more than that, there is the unique dimension that I feel that I am coming up with is something called post-qualitative inquiry.
Okay, it's a method. ये method
it's
है,
a methodology.
research का method है ये.
It's a research का methodology है. Method नहीं कहूँगा, methodology है.
Okay.
Because one needs to be very cautious about this difference between method and
methodology, right?
So methodology definitely qualitative, but within qualitative there is, or not within, but a methodology that transcends qualitative. There is something called post-qualitative methodology, जो काफी हद तक post-humanist discourse से inspired है. और post-humanist discourse में post-humanist discourse पे हम बात कर सकते हैं अगर आप चाहें तो, but majorly post-qualitative inquiry again उस non-duality को समझने के लिए,
right.
The kind of non-duality जिसको मैं समझना चाह रहा हूँ. I think that post-qualitative methodology was extremely crucial for me to dig into the nuances of what this non-duality is, because post-qualitative inquiry primarily negates the dualistic, logic of qualitative methodologies, wherein there is a separation between field and the one who is observing the field. So वो उसमें again there is the fulcrum of post-qualitative inquiry is bringing theory back into the discourse. Bringing philosophy back into the discourse. और इसमें जैसे एक छोटा सा interesting point मैं ला सकता हूँ कि जैसे many great thinkers right now are saying that we need to bring philosophy back to the domain of PhD.
Absolutely.
We need to, because PhD we know is doctorate of philosophy, So where is philosophy in that?
Whether you do it in physics or whether you do it in any other subject, it's doctrine philosophy
is sort of unavoidable.
Right.
Even when you are not engaging with philosophy, you are implicitly taking some philosophical assumptions into consideration.
Absolutely. Without, you may not be knowing that you are doing
absolutely.
that.
So post-qualitative inquiry is primarily a philosophical methodology, which is rooted in post-humanist discourse of Deleuze, and the contemporary, I would say the pioneer of this kind of methodological inquiry is a philosopher named Saint Elizabeth Peer.
Okay.
And there are others now in contemporary times working on this area, but it's a very unique thing about my research, and I can deliberate more into that if you want.
Right. So another vital part of the research is that once a researcher जब वो field में 5 साल जाता है और बहुत deeply चिंतन करता है उन सवालों पे जो that questions which are actually at the heart of his research. So one gets something new. So I think that primarily the focus, the major objective and the major task of the researcher or a PhD is to produce knowledge. That's something very important. So in other words, if I reframe my question, I would like to ask you that what is that, Varun, what is the conclusion that you drew from your work, since you must have gone through quite a good number of books, quite a in depth, as you rightly pointed out that you went to the field. Now what are your findings in the research, particularly with regard to non-duality between religion and politics, and especially how that's embedded in the Sikhism?
Yes, so I would say that there are two aspects to this non-duality. One definitely deals with the non-duality of religion and politics. And when one is arguing for non-duality of religion and politics, I think it becomes important to first spend a bit of time on what religion is and what do I mean by politics, or rather political, I would say. So in that sense, I have deliberated extensively on the whole debate of the problem of conceptualizing religion in social sciences. What is religion? What is called the ontology of religion? Ontology is the nature of reality. What kind of reality religion sort of expresses itself out, or this category of religion sort of presents us with. So for instance, अभी अगर हम देखें, historically भी अगर हम देखें, I think it's important to spend a bit of time on what this
absolutely I think it's very important. अगर हम धर्म के बारे में आज बात नहीं करेंगे तो I mean it's not a good idea. I would say it's very important, बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है कि हम धर्म के बारे में बात करें. Basically ये है क्या?
Absolutely. So that is what my research is all about, कि अभी जैसे हम एक डिस्कोर्स को देखें जो काफ़ी प्रोमिनेंट भी है, जिसमें जनरली ये माना जाता है कि religion is a modern construct. The very category of religion was a kind of a colonial ploy that was imposed on non-Western traditions to subdue their radical potentiality.
Absolutely.
This was the kind of argument given by the likes of Richard King, Tomoko Masuzawa, Arvind Pal Singh Mandir, Mark Dresslers, and others. So I am not completely negating their proposition. I'm saying that there is definitely a good amount of research, an iota of truth is there, a bit of truth is there, but it's not complete in its endeavor. Why it's not complete? Because in this process of arguing that religion is a modern term, so it should be completely abandoned, and rather we should not talk of religion, because the moment we talk of religion, the antithesis of religion is secular. And the moment we talk of religion, we somehow subdue or somehow suppresses all the progressive aspect of it. Is true, but then it somehow commits what generally called in philosophies called as genetic fallacy. Genetic fallacy में क्या होता है कि genetic fallacy is a kind of fallacious argumentation wherein the argument tries to conflate the historical and political genealogy with the efficacy of the term.
Absolutely.
As in, अगर इसको सरल शब्दों में समझाया जाए कि जनरली हम जब रिलीजन को समझने की कोशिश करते हैं और हम कहते हैं कि रिलीजन एक मॉडर्न
आधुनिक
विचार है, कॉलोनियलिज्म से आया, तो हम उसमें ये करते हैं कि हम ये भूल जाते हैं कि ठीक है, रिलीजन की हिस्टोरिकल पॉलिटिकल जीनियोलॉजी हो सकती है, उसका अपना एक पॉलिटिकल अंडरकरेंट हो सकता है जो एक टाइम में हमारे पे थोपा गया नॉन वेस्टर्न ट्रेडिशंस पे, बट आज वो हमें किस रियलिटी की तरफ दर्शा रहा है, क्या किस रियलिटी को वो मैनिफेस्ट कर रहा है, जिसे हम कहते हैं ऑन्टोलॉजिकल कंसेप्शन ऑफ रिलीजन. तो वो हम भूल जाते हैं. तो वी ट्राई टू कन्फ्लेट द efficacy of religion, or the rather the ability of this term to explain a certain kind of reality to us with the historical problems of the term. So this is what philosopher Kevin Shilbrack calls committing genetic fallacy.
Exactly.
So वो मैं नहीं कर रहा हूँ. I am somehow using religion, but I am somehow not completely using religion also. So there is a sort of a
it's like dipping in and then coming out very quickly. This is what your conclusion of the research is.
And I'm basically primarily taking it from critical realist school of philosophy.
We'll come to that part later. So again to the conclusion part. This is I think something very much important that अभी का जो हम सोशल साइंसेस करते हैं या जब हम भी यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में गए, most of the time we were introduced to categories and concepts that have a Eurocentric origin. It's not bad to use these categories, but sometimes it's also very important to contextualize these categories and then see how differently can we use these categories in our setting, which may not have a correspondence with the history that European societies had. एक और सवाल मुझे जो लगता है कि बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है किसी भी रिसर्चर के लिए, इसके बाद हम एकेडमिक पार्ट में जाएंगे, वो ये है कि लिमिटेशन ऑफ द रिसर्च. कि it's not that कि researcher doesn't face any limitations or struggles in his in his or her tenure of the PhD. So what is the difficulty? आपको क्या difficulty or what are the limitations of your PhD? The difficulties that you encountered during your 5 years. Would you like to spend some time on that?
Limitation, personally speaking, I mean, this might sound absurd to some, but then limitation, I don't know exactly, but generally जो scholars को limitation आती है वो ये आती है कि acceptance of the uniqueness of their ideas. Is there is there a receptiveness? Is there people are mostly professors, are they receptive to new ideas? In that sense, I've been sort of lucky, I would say, if I can use the term lucky, because fortunately, our group, my supervisor specifically, was open to these ideas because, as I've explained earlier, my research is quite interdisciplinary. It takes a lot from philosophy of religion, philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and political philosophy, of course. So, उस sense में, I did not face a lot of trouble when it comes to my ideas not being accepted by people, especially supervisor, because my supervisor itself has that interdisciplinary bent of scholarship and rather interdisciplinary mindset. So in that sense, but limitation, if I can certainly think of limitation, was definitely field. When you go to field, you certainly, although I'm well versed with Punjabi, my background is Punjabi, I can speak Punjabi, so the people that I have interviewed, I did not face communication issues with them. But then there is always a problem that researchers like us, coming from universities based in Delhi, we are immersed in a certain life world and in a certain culture where we have automatically, the moment we try to speak, we tend to come up with English words.
Absolutely.
And communicating that to masses in asking questions, or rather in getting to know something from them, sometimes we tend to ignore that these people are not well tuned with the kind of terminologies that we are well tuned with. So we tend to avoid using colloquial terms, which everybody should use. So everybody who is into a field should have a very good command over not just the formal language, but the way people expresses themselves in day-to-day affairs.
और ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है आई थिंक वरुण, बिकॉज जब भी हम रिसर्च पे फील्ड पे जाते हैं तो हमारा तो यही उद्देश्य रहता है कि जिनके साथ हम लोग बात कर रहे हैं उनका जो अंदर का पर्सपेक्टिव, जो रियल पर्सपेक्टिव है, वो बाहर आना चाहिए. अगर हम उससे कॉरस्पॉन्डेंस नहीं कर पा रहे हैं, इफ वी कम अप विद jargons, विद बिग टर्म्स, बिग कैटेगरीज, तो उनको दे मे नॉट बी नेसेसरली एक्वेंटेड विद दोज कैटेगरीज. सो इट्स अ स्किल दैट वन नीड्स टू हैव कि हम कैसे कॉरस्पॉन्डेंस बिल्ड अप करें ताकि जो रियल मुद्दे हैं लोगों के, आम जनता के, वो सामने आ जाए.
बिल्कुल, मैं इससे बिल्कुल इत्तेफाक रखता हूँ कि एक जो ये गैप, पेरिनियल गैप है,
हाँ,
एवरलास्टिंग गैप है, कि अगर एक रिसर्चर अपने परिप्रेक्ष्य से, अपने बैकग्राउंड से वो समाज को देखता है, और लेकिन अच्छी रिसर्च जो जनरली मानी जाती है वो यही है कि आप समाज के नज़रिए से उसको परखो. सो जिसे हम कहते हैं जनरली स्टील मैन करना किसी को समझने में, उसको डिस्टॉर्ट ना करना, उसको उसकी जो जैसा कह रहा है, एथनोग्राफिक में जिसे हम थिक डिस्क्रिप्शन भी कहते हैं, कुछ भी अगर कोई ऐसा जेस्चर कोई दे रहा है या कुछ ऐसा दे रहा है, तो यू नीड टू टेक नोट्स, मेटिकुलसली यू टेक नोट्स एंड डिलीजेंटली यू टेक नोट ऑफ दैट. सो वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण और ज़रूरी हो जाता है. और उसके अलावा जो फिलोसॉफिकल डोमेन में जो रिसर्च का पूरा डायमेंशन आता है, वो ये आता है कि फिलॉसफी की जनरली एक्सेप्टेंस जो है एकेडमिया में, वो दिन पे दिन इट्स ड्विंडलिंग. एंड इट इज़ ऑब्वियस व्हाई इट इज़ ड्विंडलिंग, बिकॉज academia has been completely instrumentalized in a manner. So obviously it's a viable question, a legitimate question to ask you, what are the implications of your research at a societal level?
Absolutely.
But implications comes up gradually. So first is the question, first is that pondering, first is that philosophical
सोचना उन सवालों पे जो सवाल हमारे सबके,
philosophical quest to understand reality. अगर एक बार आपने रियलिटी को समझने का आप में वो दिस एक क्यूरोसिटी है, एक जिज्ञासा है आपको, तो आप उसके दरमियान आपके सवाल निकलेंगे और वो सवाल का जवाब भी निकलेगा. तो डायरेक्टली जो एक अकेडमिया, बिकॉज अकेडमिया अनफॉर्चुनेटली देयर इज अ पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमिक डायमेंशन टू अकेडमिया, वी नो दैट कि यू पब्लिश और पेरिश. दैट डायमेंशन हैज, I would say, strangled the whole endeavor of philosophical endeavors and philosophical domain of academia, which needs to be rather reclaimed. And somehow my research is a step forward in that direction.
Okay. Having thought about and asked you certain questions which are very critical to any research scholar who is interested to go into PhD. Now, Varun, I will be moving to the academic questions that are of high relevance for you, and those questions I think are very important to ask. When I was going through your work, although I didn't read your full thesis, but I just had a I read some pages of your introduction as well as conclusion. So let me ask you the first question. Varun, if I understood your argument properly, you seem to be making a case for non-duality, non-opposition between religion and politics. At one point, this seems to be a very bold argument, because doing that would mean undoing Hobbesian or Lockean projector, because these are the people who began to argue that religion should be separate from politics, that religion should not intervene in politics, and politics should be completely autonomous and an independent domain. So if you do that, if you argue against or in contrast to what Hobbes and Locke might have assumed in the 15th 16th century, uh, Varun, it may be a bold argument, I don't doubt that, but given the contemporary examples in the world, for example, I last time watched Donald Trump, in his speech in America, he said that we need to bring America back to Christ. This religion and politics combine, that religious interference in politics, it may not necessarily be an egalitarian, it may not necessarily lead to an egalitarian outcome. It may not necessarily have a very beneficial and benevolent consequences for all sections of the people. Then how would you convince me and the common man that this religious interference in politics would necessarily lead to consequences that are highly egalitarian?
Uh, I think it's a very important question, I must say, because if I get your question correctly, you're trying to argue that it's a slippery slope. The moment you argue for non-duality of religion and politics, and a legitimate space of religion in politics, you you tend to somehow provide legitimacy to all the extremist elements within religion, and the consequences of that which we are seeing in contemporary world.
Absolutely.
But I think there is again a fallacy generally जो हम commit करते हैं, again a fallacy that we commit when we try to argue that this discourse of non-oppositionality will always lead to the kind of regressive politics that we are seeing in contemporary times. I think we tend to ignore that. We tend to first fundamentally ignore that, is religion unavoidable? Dealing with religion unavoidable? What do I mean by that? I'll explain that. First of all, I'm trying to argue that there are two dimensions to this phenomena called religion. One dimension dovetails with this aspect which we call community and the logic of community.
Absolutely.
Wherein politics intervene, the whole politics of demography and the concomitant fear about the other communities' demography and other communities' perception and other communities' expansion. So all these anxieties of the self tends to get transposed on communities' identity, anxiety, manifest as communities' identity, anxiety. That is definitely there. And one needs to be very cautious of that kind of engagement between politics and religion when it comes to the domain of community. But the moment we say that that is what religion is all about, we again engaging in a very superficial kind of discourse. Because the insights that we are getting right now from different fields, including cognitive science, that has philosophy, that has evolutionary psychology, that has maths, that has computer science, that somehow religion is what I called ontologically or ontically real. That is, it is sort of natural. And religion, the dimension of religion, which I'll explain what that dimension is, that dimension of religion which is real and which is natural is what I call the spiritual dimension of religion. And I am conceptualizing this as spiritual realism, that there is, apart from community dynamics, there is an aspect of religion that deals with this whole discourse of spirituality, which is real as sexuality is real. We know that after the psychoanalytic turn in critical theory, sexuality has been taken very seriously since 1930s. And Freudian, Lacanian, Zizek, all these peoples, they cannot conceptualize their ideas without taking into consideration the libidinal aspect of our being, which is fine, which is absolutely true. But mostly they tend to ignore that apart from libidinal sexual aspect of our being, there could be something called spiritual aspect of our being. And when I say spiritual, I mean relational. That spirituality is not just about some esoteric stuff, as in that could only be understood by very few acclaimed tantric and all these people, or dealing with something called occult, but rather spirituality is everyday part of our being, wherein the moment we try to transcend ourself and tries to engage with the other and tries to argue that the other is also within me, you are a part of me and I'm a part of you, we are engaging in a spiritual mode of enunciation. So there is this mode of enunciation which I call real, which is relational. Apart from that, mostly that is the aspect that has generally been ignored in contemporary theoretical theoretical groups.
Exactly.
Just let me complete this one very important aspect is this need for metaphysical abstraction. When I say religion is not going to go anywhere and it is real, it is sort of ontologically real, it is natural in that sense, and the spiritual component of religion is actually real, community is also real. So I also tend to include this whole quest, or rather need, to transcend our immediate surrounding and to delve into this domain of transcendental inquiry. So this need for transcendental abstraction, metaphysical abstraction, speculative abstraction, wherein we conceptualize reality, in different forms. We tend to think about questions pertaining to life, existence, death, life after death. All these questions, which I feel that secular frame has serious limitations in dealing with, can only be argued through a discourse which is spiritual and which constitutes an integral component of religion. So to put it in a nutshell, in my understanding, religion is unavoidable, or it's not going to go anywhere. That's why dealing with religion has become so important. Has two dimensions: community, identity, and the spiritual, which I call spiritual realism.
Absolutely. So this is, I think, again, Varun, this is a very bold way of putting your argument, because I remember when Peter Berger, one of the important sociologist justice, when he said that, now religion is absolutely, not important in our modern secular framework. It's something that we need to do away with. But he was the same person who later on admitted that it's a wonderful, it's something which you rightly pointed out is unavoidable. That's something, with which we can't avoid to have a deliberative engagement or a discussion at the metaphysical or theoretical level. But again, Varun, my anxiety comes to the same point that, see, again, the same point that, the element of spirituality. This is a remarkable way of putting your argument, because I recently read some work on John Rawls, who seems to be a purely doing distributive justice. His concerns seem to be more mundane concerns, distribution of resources, primary goods, so on and so forth. But when he died, his students went into his private room and they saw John Rawls writing on religion. But I want to push this argument. I want to know it further. My point is that religion, unlike other categories, is a very comprehensive doctrine. It's something which encompasses each and every aspect of your life. So in that situation, I completely agree with you, Varun, that religion should enter into politics to sanitize it. But then I want to know, how do I know what is the model, what is the parameter, what is the guarantee that religious intervention into politics may sanitize it? How do I know it? How do I know that the religion which is entering into politics, which is playing with politics, is spiritual, or it has a community logic? Don't you think that there needs to be a stoppage, checkpoints, the balances, all sort of things in order to make sure that religio-political interplay leads to egalitarian consequences? How do we know that?
I think this is the serious limitation of secular frame of thinking, in the sense that secular frame of thinking,
आप
deals.
पानी भी पी सकते हैं. We have arranged the water.
I think secular frame of thinking may it assumes that strict separation is possible in that sense.
And it is important.
It is important. It is possible. I'm having this discussion with the people from the MA batch yesterday only, that why not strict separation? First of all, I feel that strict separation can sound, as you rightly pointed out, can be a cure for the kind of evil that we are right now seeing that is usually being committed in the name of religion. But there are two problems to it. First of all, what we tend to do when we tend to ignore this thing, first of all, if we consider religion to be real, both the community aspect of it and the spiritual aspect of it, then we are trying to, in the secular frame, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to, again, repress something which is real. And from the experience of sexuality, if I extrapolate that argument and use that argument in the domain of spirituality, the more we used to rather repress or suppress sexuality, the more in negative fashion it used to bounce back. And the kind of patriarchal sexual violence we see is, in a way, is a manifestation of that repression only, isn't it? Same argument I'm trying to argue. The more we try to not engage with this thing, which is actually so central to our being, and when I say religion, I mean both community aspect as well as the spiritual aspect. Mostly people tend to just engage with the community thing and say, oh, there is a problem with it, because community has a parochial logic. There is a strict separation between the self and the other. That is what the community is all about. Now, that strict separation is there. But looking into the another dimension of it, which is the spiritual dimension, which is the relational dimension, which is the transcendental, this need for the transcendental abstraction, this need, this whole discourse, which is generally being ignored, has the potential to act as the panacea or as the kind of cure for the limitations that secular polity is right now showing to us. So my diagnosis is different. I think our concerns are similar, but I'm trying to, following the logic of, not exactly, I'm not using exact argument what Ashish Nandi has been using, because Ashish Nandi has not delved extensively with this whole discourse of what religion is in itself. He also has used the logic of faith and community and says that, because he's a critical traditionalist in that sense, so he ignores the nuances of what, philosophical nuances of what religion is. But somehow he has a point that, even the community dimension needs to be revisited. We tend to assume that communities always have to be sort of regressive, which definitely community has a dimension of other. That's why
आज के समय में तो
आज के समय में
थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही है,
लेकिन सवाल यही है, अब उसके साथ करें क्या? या तो उसको रिप्रेस करें बोथ कम्युनिटी डायमेंशन को और स्पिरिचुअल डायमेंशन को, या हमें आज एक ज़रूरत है क्रिटिकल और क्रिएटिव एंगेजमेंट की. एंड मेरा जो समझ बनती है वो ये है कि क्रिएटिव एंगेजमेंट अगर हम नहीं करेंगे उस चीज़ के साथ, जैसे एक छोटा सा मैं एग्जांपल दूं, पहले हम मानते थे कि धर्म जो है, रिलीजन जो है, वो सिर्फ इंसानों में पाया जाता है. ये एक बहुत ही एंथ्रोपोसेंट्रिक असम्पशन है. लेकिन आज बहुत सारी स्टडीज हैं जो हमें बताती हैं, जैसे जेन गुडिल है, रॉबर्ट मैकॉले है, बहुत सारे ऐसे प्राइमेटोलॉजिस्ट हैं और कॉग्निटिव साइंटिस्ट हैं जो हमें बताते हैं कि प्राइमरली हम भी एनिमल्स हैं. एब्सोल्युटली. And the difference between us being primates and chimpanzees being primates is hardly, there's no huge difference. We share the same DNA, 99% of the DNA. So वो जेन गुडिल की स्टडी हमें बताती है कि chimpanzees and other primates like chimpanzees are actually spiritual beings. Absolutely. They tend to delve into this whole question of rather, what death is. They mourn their dead ones. They perform a very idiosyncratic dance on waterfall dance, and they have specific rituals, and they engage in stargazing. So what is it stargazing is all about? It's a kind of a desire to understand reality. There is an aesthetic dimension to it.
So religion is, I mean, it is a very enabling category
It is natural.
to make sense
I'm
of
not
what
claiming that
reality
it's
is.
enabling. It could be destructive. It depends on the context ultimately.
Absolutely.
The contingent aspect of it.
Absolutely. Varun, जब मैं आपकी thesis, I mean the way अभी जो हम बात कर रहे थे, I get the sense that that you seem to be predominantly, disproportionately focusing on religion as spirituality, going into metaphysical abstraction. The question is of death, life after death. When we do that, when we focus on metaphysical questions, when we focus on spirituality, these are very good questions in our contemporary times, because I recently read somewhere that Steve Jobs, when in 1970s, and not only Steve Jobs, but thousands of Californians would travel thousands of kilometers from California, Los Angeles, to travel to distant spaces like Japan, India, in search of spirituality, ताकि नींद आए 8 घंटे की उन लोगों को, who were fed up with material progress in European societies. But in our societies, I mean, when I focus on these metaphysical questions, what about the question of materiality? What about the material question? Recently, Varun, मैंने क्या किया, मैंने एक अपने गांव के एक पर्सन से बात की. I asked him कि क्या आपने रोज़ा रखा? Since it is a month of Ramadan. He said कि गरीब लोग कैसे रोज़ा रख सकता है, उसे तो 10 घंटा काम करना है, and then he has to feed his family. It's not possible for a person, for a worker, to keep a roza, to keep fast for 16 hours. It's very difficult because he has to work, and when you work you need energy. So my hunch is that I am concerned that this material question, the question of distributive justice, the question of resources, the question of distribution of primary goods, it should not get subdued under this metaphysical realm, because all the people, I believe, जो मेरा मानना है, they have reflexive capacity, they are reflexive beings. They can reflect on anything, on any theory, on any problem or any concern. But all of these reflective capacities need material conditions and social context. मुझे डर लगता है इस चीज़ का कि क्या इस spiritual exercise में it shouldn't happen that material question gets subdued. Would you like to respond to this?
बिल्कुल, but ये एक assumption है कि spirituality जो है वो, जैसे मैंने बोला कि उसका एक relational dimension है और एक उसका metaphysical dimension है. जब हम relational dimension की बात करेंगे, जैसे अभी सिख डिस्कोर्स में अगर हम आए, क्योंकि मेरा काम उस पर है तो उस पर ज़्यादा बात नहीं हुई है, सिख डिस्कोर्स में तो ये ड्यूअलिटी है ही नहीं. जो मटेरियल कंसर्न्स हैं, जो जस्टिस का कंसर्न है, जैसे ऐसे हमें कंसेप्चुअल कैटेगरीज मिलती हैं सिख फ्रेम ऑफ थॉट में, जैसे हलीमी राज कहते हैं, जैसे गुरु नानक का जो प्राइमरी था, क्या उनका थॉट में वर्ण शकना, किर्त करना और नाम जपना. वर्ण शकना मीन्स डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव कंपोनेंट ऑफ जस्टिस. डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करो whatever your wealth is. So wealth is always collective. I think the moment we tend to ask this question to this whole discourse of traditions, spiritual traditions, non-Western traditions, we assume that only secular frame of thought can only deal with material questions.
इसी के पास इन सारे सवालों के उत्तर हैं कि
like
how
they
to,
are the ones, they have the sole right to speak on materiality. We tend to suppress the potentialities of these traditions, and people like Tomoko Masuzawa, Richard King, they are exactly saying the same thing. अगर आप Richard King का पढ़ें, Orientalism and the Origin of the Mystic East,
yes.
वो एक Orientalist discourse में ही बताना है कि Eastern spirituality is all about mysticism, it's all about the other world. There is a component of other world to it, but that component does not negate this world. तो जब हम ये assumption बना लेते हैं कि उसमें एक this world negation है, we again engages in commits tremendous amount of fallacies. And a lack of reading is there on the part of so many scholars जो ये assumptions लेकर आते हैं.
Right.
Because materiality and consciousness, they go hand in hand, as far as
absolutely,
as far as my research of Sikh frame of thought is concerned. And I have used so many examples from Sikh text, from Guru Nanak's discourse with Nath Yogis, in something called Siddh Gosht. Siddh Gosht is a seminal part of Guru Granth Sahib, Adi Granth, wherein Guru Nanak is engaging in the same kind of discourse with yogis, that your understanding of self, which basically deals with the question of transcendence, is incomplete. Because the moment you talk of transcendence, you are talking of transcendence through immanence. तभी गुरु नानक इज कॉल्ड सोशली इन्वॉल्व्ड एनुंशिएट, गृहस्थ जीवन, बट एक ऐसा गृहस्थ, एक ऐसा जोगी जो गृहस्थ में समाया हुआ है, तो उसका एक नजरिया है, उसका एक आंख है जो अदरवर्ल्डली है, बट वो अदरवर्ल्डली आंख निकल के आ रही है गृहस्थ से ही. So that is what socially involved enunciation is all about. And that is where the uniqueness of our tradition comes into existence. When I say uniqueness, there is no apology for tradition here. Some people can take this insight that I am apologizing for religion and I'm a religious apologist, which I am not. I'm critically understanding religion. And through that critical, discursive, creative engagement, I'm trying to argue that non-Eastern traditions needs to be revisited. The radical potentialities. So the whole question is to deal with the question of justice, materiality, not pitting one against the other, materiality against
but
consciousness and spirituality. There is a correspondence. They go hand in hand.
Right. So Varun, since we are running short of the time, I have had too many questions to ask, but then one or two very short questions is that when I went through your introduction, I got the sense that you seem to be using the terms religion, religious and religiosity, especially the two terms, very interchangeably. But if I go by Jonathan Z. Smith's argument, he seems to be making a huge distinction between the terms religion, religious. He seems to argue that, we have a history of religion but not of religious. Is my reading correct that you seem to be using these terms interchangeably, or you need to, there needs to be there needs to make some distinction between these terms, especially in their historical genealogy?
I think again, the moment we tend to overemphasize this question of historical and political genealogy, we tend to completely ignore जो genetic fallacy वाला component है कि आज वो हमें term क्या बता रही है. My work is philosophical, creative engagement, and I am not a historian. My task is not to look into the debate कि उसकी genealogy कहाँ से आई है, because that is the job of a historian. My task is to take this category of religion creatively and critically and to use it to see कि भाई उसका application क्या है, reality को समझाने में वो क्या किस तरीके की मदद कर सकती है. तो वो है, तो that is what critical realist engagement with religion is all about. And again, I must say that, although there is paucity of time, but I must say that there is one component of my work which I think that needs to be sort of deliberated more, is the idea of sovereignty and how
that I will come. Since this is the last question, that what does your work, there's non-opposition between religion and politics, tell me about? What does it tell me about pluralism? What does it tell me about sovereignty? Because अभी के समय में मुझे लगता है कि inter community relations is a very thick concept. It's something which we need all to discuss. In the case of Punjab, since आपका काम पंजाब पे है, what does your work tell me about interplay of religion, politics, and then linking this question to can it easily translate into pluralism and a notion of sovereignty which is not monistic?
Yes, I think that, as I pointed out earlier, that there are two aspects to this non-duality. One definitely deals with non-duality of religion and politics and the progressive, emancipatory, liberatory potential of that aspect of religion. But the second aspect, which generally is ignored by when we tend to engage with this idea of radical potentiality within religion, is that its possibilities of accommodating diversity.
Absolutely.
The question of plurality.
ये बहुत महत्वपूर्ण सवाल है,
बहुत ज़रूरी सवाल है. And I think Sikh discourse में यही सबसे important सवाल रहा है. And what I'm trying to argue here is that जो original Sikh doctrine, philosophical doctrine है, जो philosophical जो सिक्खी बोलते हैं, जो non-mode of enunciation, non-modernist mode of enunciation है, Sikh frame of thought का, उसमें multiplicity और oneness is entangled. एक अनेक का model. One that is multiple. That one that is multiple provides you with this metaphysical ground where there is multiple ways to be Sikh. To be a Sikh. And that is what used to be the case in a certain temporal frame. For instance, if you look at the work of Harjot Oberoi, even Arvind Mandate, many people, now this has become a commonsensical stuff in academic study of religion, that, you know, earlier kind of Sikhi, the kind of Sikhi that we see before the advent of colonial modernity, was vastly different. And that is what I feel, you know, I've tried to understood that pre-modern mode of enunciation has not completely completely eliminated. Rather, it is still alive in the quotidian daily affairs of Punjabis. And that is what I'm trying to argue is an impediment, acts as an impediment or a bulwark to the communal school of thought or a communal frame of thinking, which I am calling has a lot to do with the way state has unfolded in Punjab. So the social implication of my work is to understand that collective consciousness that has combated communalism. And my hypothesis is that there were, you know, residues, not residues, I would say. There were, there was strong ground for it from the initial time. But that consciousness, which was collective, which was eclectic, which was syncretic, got subdued due to a certain unfolding of the state and a certain political dimension to it, political economic dimension to it, a certain materiality subdued that collective consciousness. But that collective consciousness does not completely die, because that collective consciousness is historically constructed, it is embodied, it is embedded. And somehow it, it fights back. And it fights back, and it's still visible in the common daily affairs of Punjabis, and that's what my ethnographic research is all about, to look into different sects, different संप्रदाय, और उन संप्रदायों के दरमियान में जो गठजोड़ है, entanglement है, where, you know, what is called Punjabiyat. Absolutely. A part of me is within you, a part of you is within me, self and other का binary इतना नहीं है, एक tradition दूसरी tradition के साथ, you know, खिचड़ी की तरह exist कर रहा है. So why is it important? You know, it is important because it is again political. When we say political, we just don't mean that justice, materials, redistributive concerns. We also seriously argue for, as you rightly pointed out, intercommunal harmony, social healing. And I feel social healing and intercommunal, interfaith harmony can only exist when there is, again, you know, entanglement or creative engagement. And creative engagement has been part of the quotidian life, everyday affairs.
This is a fascinating point that I got from your work, that ek anek, that one that is multiple. So this consciousness is only one. We all are part of that. So that would it would mean that, you know, it's then what makes it sense to call someone a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh when we all belong to same.
There might be some sense in calling someone Hindu, but that Hindu, as Anshu Malhotra rightly points out, that what is syncretism? Syncretism is not just amalgamation of tradition. It is that, you know, it is that epistemic frame rather. It is that frame that provides you with this, you know, plausibility or possibility of multiple interpretations. And absolutely. One wherein being a Hindu does not mean just being a Hindu.
Absolutely. There is liminality to it.
Absolutely, liminality. That liminality somehow gets obliterated, or rather gets somehow became dormant, or you know, it was existing in a phase of latency due to a certain kind of modernity, and and that manifestation of that kind of lack of liminality was the functioning of the modernist institutions like SGPC. And that is what my research is all about.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Varun, for joining me, and thank you to viewers as well for watching our podcast. Please stay in touch with us through our website at fcsr.in and through our YouTube channel Vimarsh Cafe. We will continuously be notifying you our latest and incoming updates. Thank you so much, Varun, and thank you all.